In my last video, I found out there was a timeline where Alan Prost won 7 Drivers' Championships if the point system was slightly different. And then I got this comment, and that got me thinking, what would the history of F1 be with one standardized point system throughout all of its history? So, today, I will be going through every season of F1 and changing all the results to today's standard 25-point system. Bear in mind that means no fastest lap, as that has been taken away for 2025. And I'm going to see how different the world of F1 would be today. And oh boy, you'll want to stick around for the full video, as there are some crazy changes. Straight away, I'd like to give a huge shout out to the website Formula One Points, as this is the website I used to find out the differences, as they've got this brilliant situation where they can get some seasons, the total points, and put it into a different point system. However, big disclaimer, it doesn't take in dropped points, so I had to fact check every single season up until the drop point system was removed, as sometimes their results were a little bit off. But anyway, like and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 2,000 subs by the end of March, and let's get straight into it. Elvis, asbestos, being in bloody everything, and when I mean everything, they were even in cigarettes, and their favourite pastime was wiggling something around their body. But most importantly, F1 was an official championship with a standardized set of rules. Now for the 50s, the points were given to the top 5, with the person who got the fastest lap getting that extra point. And throughout the seasons, they would also have the dropped point system, and this could range from 4, 5 or 6 races in the seasons. So what are the new outcomes with the 25-point system? Well, I can tell you, let's get out of the way the seasons that had no drastic changes whatsoever, and that would be 1950, 51, 52, 54, and 58. So, the first change of the video comes in 1953, with Mike Hawthorne moving up from 3rd place into 2nd place of the championship. And interestingly, he would take Fangio's 2nd place. However, the driver in the middle, who was Farina, would keep his 3rd. In 1955, pardon my French quite literally, Maurice Trintignant moved up to 3rd place, overtaking Eugenio Castellotti, which separated them by a single point, even in the new system. 1956, we had Bearer on the move, moving up to 2nd, ahead of Sterling Moss and Peter Collins. In 57, we see a returning name of Mike Hawthorne being the driver that benefits, overtaking Musso for the top 3 spots. And then finally, the biggest hit of the new point system I have put in place is Sterling Moss dramatically in 1959, 3rd place to 5th, with Maurice Trintignant taking that 3rd place. So overall, for the 1950s, we had no driver championship changes. We're just rolling into it, don't you worry. The person who got the worst outcome definitely was Sterling Moss. It feels like every season there was a change, it was sadly him. New decade with new trends. Beatlemania swept the world. Asbestos was now out of cigarettes and now just only in everything else. But luckily for us, F1 had spiced up their point system and added some new stuff. So for the first season of 1960, all they did was make it the top 6 got points. 1st place got 8 points, all the way down to 6th getting 1 point, with the fastest lap revoked. Then from 1961 onwards, all the way to 1990. So you won't be seeing me talk about any of the point systems up until the 90s. We had the set rules of the points being 9 points for 1st, with 6th getting 1. And we had the same situation with the dropped points. It could span between your top 5 results of a season all the way up to your top 14. It really depended what season we look at. Realistically, it moved up and up. As the F1 seasons got longer, you needed to take into account more than 5 races, otherwise you'd be getting people scoring exactly the same amount of points. Then it gets very messy. To counteract that, they added more races. Eventually, they would just get rid of this rule. So, the question we all have in our minds, what happens in the 60s when you add the new 25-point system? Well, again, like the 50s, I'll go through the seasons that have no dramatic changes. And that would be 1965, 67, 68, and 69. So, heading into 1960, who is the loser of this whole situation? And well, if you're seeing a trend, I think it is because there is one. Sterling Moss again loses out in this scenario.
You're joking. Not another one?
Dropping down to 5th, with Inez Ireland moving up to 3rd, and Phil Hill going up to 4th. In 1961, I bet you couldn't guess who it is again. Sterling Moss gets dropped again.
Easy top 3. if I'm not 16th!
Dropping down to 4th in the standings, originally from 3rd, with Dan Gurney taking that spot. He really can't catch a break. In 1962, we had Jim Clark moving from 2nd down to 3rd, with Bruce McLaren taking his spot in 2nd place. In 1963, we had Hill losing his 2nd place to Ginther. And then finally, for the first time in this video, we have a driver championship change. Sadly for John Surtees, this means he no longer keeps the title, as Graham Hill goes from 2nd place up to take that championship, with their points separating them, with Hill on 126, with Surtees on 119. And for Hill at the time, this would be his 2nd Drivers' Championship. So then finally ending off the 60s, we move on to 1966, where we would again see John Surtees drop down to 3rd, however this time not losing a championship, but he does lose his 2nd place, and Rindt takes that spot, with them separated by 2 points, 85 to 83. Again, very close. You're going to see a big trend where it normally means the points are extremely close. So the 60s ended pretty similar to the 1950s. You had Sterling Moss taking hit after hit. However, the person who takes the biggest loss of the full decade has to be John Surtees. He loses his 2nd place in 66. And most importantly, his one and only championship in 1964. So I bet you couldn't guess who is my big winner of 1960. Of course, it has to be Graham Hill. He won an extra championship. It's time to boogie, is what I can imagine someone somewhere in the 70s said, as this was the decade that disco fully began to thrive. It was also the first time an email was sent, Space Invaders was released, taking the world by storm, and don't think it was leaving ya, because asbestos was still in your house trying to kill you. Oh, and another great decade of F1. So throughout the season, where were no drastic changes to any of the top 3, that would be in 1971, 74, 75 and 79. We've got quite a few seasons to go through this decade. So we'll start off with 1970. We saw Clay Regazzoni drop from 3rd place with 103 points to his name down to 4th, with Denny Hume taking that 3rd spot. He would end up with 105 points, again a very tight battle for the spots that changed. In 1972, we actually saw plenty of changes even outside of the top 3, but looking inside to the top 3, we see Jackie Stewart, the big loser of this season, dropping from 2nd to 3rd with 136 points to his name, and Denny Humes for another season, overtaking him by 1 point on 137. I think Denny Humes quite like in this scenario so far. Then in 1973, we had Ronnie Peterson going from 3rd to 4th, with Sever taking his 3rd spot with 156 points to Peterson's 151. And even though Jackie Stewart got quite unlucky in 1972, losing his spot, he would retain his championship this season. So all would end up fair. And then we have 1976. And oh boy, we have another driver championship change. Why did it have to be this season?
What?
No, all right. I know that sounds bad.
Sadly for James Hunt, he would lose out to the title to Niki Lauda by 2 points. And considering everything Niki Lauda went through that season, that would have been an impeccable win for him, but very sad for James Hunt, as this would be his only championship, and with him losing it, he would never become an F1 champion. In 1977, we had Andretti moving from 3rd, with Reutemann going up to 3rd. This time, actually quite a big gap considering what we've seen so far, with Reutemann on 158 to Andretti's 148. And then finally, for the 70s, we have Ronnie Peterson again dropping down, losing his 2nd place, with Reutemann taking that spot. Them separated by 3 points with 162 to 159. So, for the full 70s decade, biggest loser has to be James Hunt. He loses his one and only title, very similar to the 60s situation with Surtees. However, the biggest winners, definitely Niki Lauda, and small wins for Denny Hume. Synthpop was taking over the whole world, and apparently at the same time taking away everyone's ability to make a sensible decision, as this was the decade that the rat tail was popularized. However, good news on the asbestos front, this was the first decade that you started to see it getting banned in quite a few countries, as in the UK, brown and blue asbestos was banned. So what was going on in the world of F1? Well, you'll like to know nothing dramatic changed in 1980, 81, 86, and 89. So that means we go straight into 1982. What changed here? Well, I'll bloody tell you. We had KK Rosberg keeping his title, so no changes for the Driver Championship. However, we had Didier Pironi losing his second place to John Watson. Technically took second place, but from the F1 standings, technically they were both second place, so John Watson kept his second place but gained the second place. We're going to go with it. All it means is Didier Pironi drops down to third. And then we have 1983. Originally, this was one of Nelson Piquet's championship seasons. However, this time round, him and Alain Prost end on equal points. Now, like I mentioned earlier in the video, sometimes it makes mistakes. And I wanted to double check, okay, does it actually think Nelson Piquet won this championship? And then when following through with research, I found out Prost won 4 of the races this season to Nelson Piquet's 3. So, the tiebreaker, which I've always used, and in F1 it states that it used, would mean that the championship would go to Alain Prost. So that's what I'm going with. So that means Alain Prost gains that championship from Nelson Piquet. 1984, and we have a very similar situation happening. However, it's not on equal points this time. Sadly for Niki Lauda, he gained 1 championship, but he loses 1 again. He loses 1984 again to Alain Prost. Funnily enough, like I mentioned, Alain Prost did outscore them both these seasons, so I was not surprised to hear he gains both of these titles. They would be separated with 213.5 points to Prost's name to 209 for Lauda. In 1985, can it be the three-peats? No, it bloody can't. It's not as dramatic this season. However, we did have changes with KK Rosberg dropping down to 4th with 129 points, with Elio De Angelis moving from all the way up from 5th to 3rd place, him being a big winner with 135 points. A pretty big jump for him. In 1987, we have Ayrton Senna, the big winner for this season under the new system, with 190 points to Nigel Mansell, with him now in 3rd. And in the 1988, well, wouldn't you know if you'd watched the start of the video, it's a change in the Drivers' Championship. Sadly for Ayrton Senna, he loses a 1988 championship. This now means Alain Prost has gained 3 titles in this video, and this would also be the highest scoring tally so far of this video, with Prost on 301 points to Senna's 275. Bear in mind this is because of just how dominant that McLaren was. 301 points in 16 races, considering what reliability was back in the 80s. Incredible. But that is all she wrote for the 1980s, so let's go into the 90s and see what F1 has to offer for us. Hello there, it is the 1990s, where we finally had the Game Boy and the PlayStation in the world. And it was official, the world was going digital. But it was a shame that asbestos was not following this trend, as it would still be in your house in most countries. So let's check in on the F1 25-point system here. Well, you'll be quite sad to hear that in these seasons there was no dramatic changes. 1990, 91, 93, 96, and 98. However, like I mentioned, it is now time for some new points in the original seasons. So, long gone are the days of dropped points in the F1 seasons. Now every single race will count towards your points, no matter what happens. What's also changed? Now the top 6 would score first place 10 points down to 6 getting 1 point until the year of 2002. So, going into 1992, big move, Michael Schumacher, formerly of 3rd place for 92, now moved up to 2nd place ahead of Patrese, 181 to 177. Then in 1994, we have another Drivers' Championship change. This originally would be the season where Schumacher won a title. Well, this time it doesn't happen, as Damon Hill is able to outscore Michael Schumacher. Originally with Schumacher winning by 1 point in this scenario, it now ends up with Damon Hill winning with 252 points to Schumacher's 236. Meaning that the whole drama about the crash means it actually worked in Damon Hill's favour. And are we going to go back to back in 1995? Sadly not, but there is a few changes, and that would be David Coulthard going from 3rd place to 4th with Johnny Herbert taking his spot. But then we have some more driver changes in 97. 1990s by far best decade for all of these changes, as very similar to Niki Lauda's situation, Schumacher loses 1, but then he gains 1. Jacques Villeneuve no longer wins the championship and Schumacher takes the championship, meaning again a pinnacle point of F1 with that whole crash with Schumacher and Villeneuve, with Schumacher crashing off. It actually meant that doesn't matter. Sadly for Villeneuve, like many of the cases we've seen in this scenario, it means his one and only championship would get revoked, with Schumacher ending on 229, to Villeneuve's 222. And if you thought the fun was done, well, this is my most shocking season of them all. Saw another driver championship change, with first place going to bloody Eddie Irvine. In the Ferrari, after everything that happened to Ferrari in this season, he managed to actually do it this time. Mika Hakkinen loses out on his second title, meaning he'll end his career with only one title to his name, but Eddie Irvine officially is an F1 champion. Incredible scenes. You tell me, was it worth Villeneuve, Hunt, Surtees losing their championships for Eddie Irvine to win one? Comment down below what you think. But in this scenario, not only would Eddie Irvine win with the 25-point system, he would get 237 points to Mika Hakkinen's 216. He'd actually win quite comfortably. So, by far the 90s was the most exciting decade so far. However, let's go and check what the 2000s are saying. We now had the iPhone, the PSP, and the Wii all releasing in the same decade. This was the first decade I was participating in, and finally more and more countries were getting on that bandwagon and banning asbestos. But what hands down has to be the greatest achievement of the noughties was that Club Penguin was officially released. But what's going on in the world of F1? What are the changes, you might ask? Absolutely nothing. I'm not kidding, it's such an abrupt ending to this video. But there were no top 3 changes in the F1 standings. If you go from the new point system, which is now the top 8 getting the points, with first getting 10 points, all the way down to 8th getting 1 point, there's no changes. And you'd think, especially in seasons that were so close, like 2003, Raikkonen could overtake Schumacher? Nope. 2007, Kimi Raikkonen, Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, all separated by 1 point. Then again, 2008, Felipe Massa and Lewis Hamilton separated by a single point in this season. Lewis Hamilton still comes out on top. So I really thought there was going to be 3 seasons where potentially something could happen, at least. And nothing did. Fair enough. You can't change everything in F1 history. Now, of course, 2010s and 2020s, this is when this point system was in place, so we know who won. But from this scenario, what have we learned? So, if this took place, Graham Hill would come from 2 drivers' titles up to 3. John Surtees would lose his one and only to his name. James Hunt would sadly follow behind, losing his title, with Niki Lauda actually balancing out, gaining 1 and losing 1, still ending his career with 3 to his name. We have Prost, the biggest mover of them all, moving up to 7 championships. You have Nelson Piquet losing one of his 3 titles, going down to 2. Similar fate goes for Ayrton Senna, going from 3 championships to 2, losing that 88 season. You then have Damon Hill to a 1-time drivers champion to a double. Jacques Villeneuve losing his title. Mika Hakkinen then going down to a single title to his name. And crazily enough, Eddie Irvine going up to being a drivers champion. So on that bombshell, it was great fun to do, but none of this really mattered. Take care.